Architectures of Profit, the Evolution of Strategic Management. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to unpack exactly how organizations design their way to success. Think about the biggest, most influential companies operating in the world today. I mean, they didn't just stumble into market dominance by accident, right? They architected it, quite literally from the ground up. So today, we're going to embark on a really fascinating journey to explore the evolution of how leaders map out these exact blueprints for long-term profitability.
Okay, let's just dive right into the core mystery here. The prime goal of any organization is to maximize profits. But how do they actually do it? How do they consistently beat their competition year after year, especially in these completely unpredictable, highly volatile markets we see today? Hitting the status quo, yeah, that just doesn't cut it anymore. It's a persistent, high-stakes question that every manager, founder, and executive wrestles with daily to figure out how to stay ahead of the pack.
Well, the secret lies in crossing the gap. It's the critical difference between merely hitting the industry average profitability and securing a true competitive advantage. Earning the average profit, that keeps the lights on, pays the basic bills. But exceeding that average, that is where competitive advantage actually lives. It's the difference between merely surviving a tough quarter and actively thriving. And crossing that massive gap requires a very specific toolkit that we're going to break down for you.
And this brings us to the core definition of strategic management. Essentially, it's a complex, interconnected pile of decisions that managers make to, well, bear those fruitful results. It's identifying, structuring, and executing the exact strategies that lead directly to company growth. It's never just one isolated choice made in some dark boardroom. It's an entire sequence of appropriate actions designed to relentlessly push a company forward and adapt to absolutely whatever the market throws at it.
Battlefields to boardrooms. Let's look at where this concept actually came from, moving from ancient warfare straight to the modern boardroom. Now, this is fascinating. If you trace the word strategy back to its literal roots, it comes directly from the Greek word strategos, which literally translates to general. So business strategy was born completely from military warfare. Initially, this term was confined entirely to the brutal arenas of politics and war. It had absolutely nothing to do with selling products or capturing market share. It was actually, scratch that, it was literally about generals maneuvering troops, rationing supplies, and outsmarting an enemy on a physical battlefield.
Over in the corporate world, what was initially just called a dry business policy has dramatically evolved. Today, as practitioners and researchers have really refined these concepts, we recognize modern strategic management as this fascinating blend of both a precise science and a highly creative art. The science relies on rigorous data, market analyses, and metrics, but the art? That's the human intuition, the creative risk-taking, and the visionary leadership required to actually execute it. It's a completely dynamic discipline.
Let's track the timeline here and see how this actively builds. Before the 1950s, as we established, strategy was a purely military and political concept. But right there in the 1950s and 60s, during the massive post-war economic boom, corporate leaders realized they desperately needed those military-level frameworks to manage their increasingly complex enterprises. The concept was initiated, and post-1960s, business leaders finally started dragging this exact battlefield framework directly into the corporate arena. Post-1960s, we get the heavy hitters. 4 pioneering contributors emerged: Alfred Chandler, Peter Drucker, Igor Ansoff, and Bruce Henderson. These were the masterminds who successfully incorporated the term strategy into the corporate world. They weren't just academics sitting in an ivory tower, they were essentially the founding generals of modern business management. By taking those complex warfare tactics and rigorously translating them into frameworks for boardroom success, they fundamentally changed how every major corporation on Earth operates to this very day. The absolutely crucial point of this era is perfectly captured in this quote by Alfred Chandler. Listen to this. Strategy is the determination of the basic long-term goals of an enterprise and the adoption of courses of action and the allocation of resources necessary for carrying out these goals. So it's not just dreaming about a profitable future. It's the practical, boots-on-the-ground work of intentionally organizing your money, your time, and your people to literally force those goals to become a reality. The GE turning point. So how exactly did we get from these early academic theories to the modern, aggressive practice we see today? Let's take a look. Boom, the 1980s. Everything shifted dramatically.
This was a decade of massive economic shifts, global expansion, and fierce hyper-competition. It was the ultimate proving ground, the era where theory finally met reality at a scale no one had ever really seen before. And this massive paradigm shift, it was driven almost entirely by one specific corporate giant deciding to just rewrite the rules of how a business should be run. General Electric, an absolute pioneer in the space, GE made the massive leap from merely doing passive strategic planning to active strategic management. They didn't just write a nice plan, put it in a binder, and let it gather dust on a shelf. No way. They actively and relentlessly managed their daily operations by it. This was an operational shift so monumental that most other big organizations were forced to immediately follow suit just to survive. 4 phases of strategy. Now we're going to look at the real-world scenario where a business purposefully evolves through 4 distinct phases. It's really cool to trace the exact roadmap a company takes to reach true strategic maturity. They move step by step through 4 entirely distinct phases, beginning at the ground level with basic financial planning, moving up to forecast-based planning, expanding their vision into externally oriented planning, and finally arriving at the ultimate goal, which is full strategic management. Every single step here requires a fundamental shift in how the entire organization thinks. Just look at the extreme contrast here between the starting line and the finish line. In phase 1, you're basically just painfully scraping together an annual budget. It's heavily time-consuming, relies entirely on internal information, and features very little actual market analysis. But if a company manages to evolve to phase 4, the entire organization is dynamically involved. They aren't just budgeting, they're forecasting and preparing contingency strategies, making strategic information accessible absolutely everywhere. But getting there? Well, it involves some serious growing pains. Between those extremes, companies have to graduate through the middle phases. In phase 2, managers realize a 1-year budgeting horizon simply isn't enough, so they stretch their mindset to forecast-based planning, looking out 3 to 5 years. Then they endure the painful graduation to phase 3, externally oriented planning, where formal strategy formulation really takes over, and top management begins to aggressively look outside their own walls. However, phase 3 introduces a massive trap, the bottleneck. The top-level generals take total control of the planning process, leaning way too heavily on expert consultants and formal formulation. And it becomes a huge bottleneck because there's very little input from the lower-level departments. The top levels are making these massive sweeping decisions in a total vacuum, operating completely detached from the daily realities and the critical intelligence that you only find on the ground floor. Finally, in phase 4, true strategic management is achieved, and that dangerous bottleneck is completely shattered. Top management finally realizes that the absolute best strategies require inputs from all levels. They encourage planning from the ground up, making vital information accessible everywhere. By coupling rigorous forecasting with dynamic contingency strategies, the company bends but doesn't break. The ultimate planning stays at the top, sure, but the strategic insight is initiated from absolutely everywhere, making the whole organization incredibly resilient. So, based on these milestones, you really have to ask yourself, where does your own organization's battlefield currently lie? Are you stuck in a phase 3 bottleneck with consultants running the show? Or have you unlocked the dynamic all-level input of phase 4? Take a hard look at your team today, because in today's fiercely competitive landscape, if you aren't actively managing your own strategy, whose strategy are you just passively following?